Napp is the executive director of the American Values Coalition, specialized in religion and politics for his PhD in political science, and for his dissertation he studied the Christian right during the George W. Bush administration. He spent 8.5 years as a politics editor and journalist at the Christian Post, watching and writing about how churches approached immigration and other important issues. He's studied how Christian views on immigration have changed over time, and therefore brings both head and heart to this conversation. Napp Nazworth. Let's give it up for Napp Nazworth. Okay. Pastor Caleb Campbell leads a church in Pheonix, Arizona. I have had dinner with Caleb, and I do know he knows how to have joy. He covers a lot of serious topics and is a fun and silly man. He leads a church in Pheonix, Arizona, right at the intersection of faith and immigration. Through his ministry and recent book, Disarming Leviathan, he's helping Christians have honest, grace-filled conversations about what it means to follow Jesus and his heart for our immigrant neighbors. He's walked alongside church members wrestling with these issues and knows firsthand how to build bridges when people disagree. So they're going to help us understand how we got here, and more importantly, how we can strengthen and multiply the witness of churches that continue to welcome the stranger as Jesus taught us. So we will ask a couple questions here, and I'll sit down with you guys. Napp, if you would get us started on how has the American Christian engagement with immigration evolved in the United States?
So I think one of the biggest changes we've seen over the last 20 years or so is that it used to be that immigration was one of those issues where conservative and liberal Christians would work together on these issues. I know when I studied the Christian right during the George W. Bush administration, there was a divide, right? There was still some xenophobia within the Christian right, but it was more fringe at that time. And this was actually through the Obama administration, too, when I was a journalist for the Christian Post. I'll give you a great example. So I was at a Christian right conference during the Obama administration. This is, a few years before Trump. And I remember Phyllis Schlafly coming out and giving a speech that was very sort of dehumanizing of immigrants. And it was a little shocking even in some ways, some of the language she was using. And it was very much like a speech you would hear Trump give today. So this is like long before Trump came on the scene. But the interesting thing about that conference is, and what happened, so after she was done with her speech, the moderator of the conference came on, who was Carlos Campo, a Hispanic evangelical leader and very pro-immigrant, and he just sort of did a quick fact check of one of her points that she had made, and then he announced the next speaker, who was Samuel Rodriguez, another Hispanic evangelical leader at the same conference. So you had both those views going on at the same Christian right conference. And at the time, it felt to me like Phyllis Schlafly, what she was presenting was just sort of this fringe view within the Christian right. But that fringe now has become the mainstream within the Christian right. And so I think that's been the biggest shift we've seen.
So if that's kind of a journalist dissertation overview of the landscape, Caleb, you have been pastoring in a church. I'm curious from your perspective, like what is the evolving of perspectives on, how's it evolved, perspectives on immigration evolved in the kind of pastoral context?
Yeah, in our context, we are about a 50-year-old congregation in the Phoenix suburbs, non-denominational Bible church. Phoenix is actually, we talk about immigration all the time, border state. I'm about 3 hours from Rocky Point, Mexico. But also a lot of refugees get resettled in Phoenix. We're one of the more popular destinations. And so our congregation has been involved in caring for immigrants and refugees for decades. And the shift really, what I've noticed, I've been in this congregation since 2001, met the Lord there on staff since 2006, so I've been there for a while. What I've noticed is that it previously been immigrants were viewed as people who are different but not inherently criminal. And one of the shifts has been to conflate criminal activity with immigrant. So that kind of redefining what immigration means or immigrants mean. Most of the folks in my congregation who are now maybe anti-immigration, when you have a conversation, they're anti-crime. And they've associated crime with immigrants. So that, I think, is a big shift that I've seen over the last 20 years.
So I know you a little bit better than I know Napp, not a lot better. But I just want to press that, like, what does that mean? Like, that still sounded like a little bit surfacey. How does that show up? That a church member that's anti-immigration has connected that with actually being criminal. Do they say it to you? Do they?
Yes.
Yes.
So
say more
I'll give
about
you, for
that.
instance. 15 years ago, if my predecessor would have told a positive story about an immigrant from our church advocating for reform, people probably would have been like, that sounds great. That's great. Last year, I shared a story about one of our leaders, a young woman who is a DACA recipient. She grew up in our church and has been advocating at the state capitol for specific reforms around tuition fees for state college, that she would get in-state tuition fees. And there's this beautiful story, and I'm glad to share it with y'all at lunch when we do the workshop, but I told a positive story about her showing Christ-likeness to a political opponent. I didn't say anything about DACA. I didn't say, she's an immigrant. I set the scene. And that was met with a Bible study in my congregation, basically getting to the point to where they had an ambassador from the Bible study come and meet with me who said, you need to get on stage and tell people you're anti-crime. And I said, what is giving you the impression that I'm like pro-crime? Like as a theologically evangelical pastor, I thought we could just assume I'm down on it. But honestly, they had gotten themselves in the subsequent conversations that was all based on fear and anxiety, that they had gotten to the point where they felt like their pastor did not care about their well-being because in speaking positively about an immigrant, they had filtered that through the lens of immigrant equals crime. And therefore, because Pastor Caleb did not say a corrective word about crime, I mean, I'm not making this up, literally, crime.
Yeah.
It's like, you got to say you're anti-crime. That they had felt like I didn't care about their well-being because they had so closely associated immigration with criminal activity.
Well, I'm going to bring it back to Napp here, but and I think this will happen over the workshop at lunch, but one of my reasons for my admiration for your pastoral work, Caleb, is that you will tell that story and the absurdity of that story, and yet and you have pastored in a way that is not condescending towards. You understand where that fear is coming from, that Bible study. It's absurd that they might be making the implication that you're pro-crime. Obviously you're not. And yet they too are image bearers that have some core thing that they're wrestling with. And I just appreciate the way that you have done that work. So Napp, I'm going to come back to you for kind of round two of your question, but I actually, not in the notes. Will you describe what American Values Coalition does? So I gave the bio of you were in journalism. Now you're running American Values Coalition. Can you say that? And then I'll ask you the next question.
Yeah, so American Values Coalition helps people who either are conservative or have friends or family members who are broadly defined conservative Americans who are now going down a dark road of extremism, misinformation, due to where they're getting their news and information from right-wing media sources or their social media or whatever it is. And so we want to help those on the right, have those friends and family members that they love, that they care about, help you with resources and information on how to rebuild that relationship, oftentimes if it's a broken relationship, and how to help them sort of come out of that sort of rabbit hole of extremism and misinformation that we've seen so many of our friends and family members go down.
Again, I would say what a beautiful ministry. So thank you for that. So go back to your original question, your original answer on like how the immigration has evolved and they're talking about it. Why has it changed in that way? Why could Phyllis Schlafly and those other names that you mentioned be in a room together then and not now?
So we're going to have a lot of pastors speaking today who can talk about sort of the spiritual battle aspects of this. I'm going to stay in my lane and give you the social science answer.
Yeah.
So I think and it's complicated, but I'll talk about the three main things I think are going on. The first is partisanship. Partisanship is a very powerful thing because when you become loyal to a political party, what happens in your brain is that you're going to trust sources that identify with that political party. You're going to distrust sources that don't. And so your brain is processing information in a way that you're not getting the full picture, not getting the clear view of what's going on. So and it's a very powerful thing that happens in our brains. When we become very partisan in our thinking. The second one is the change in the media environment, and there has now been created this right-wing media bubble that a lot of people are in. And this started really in the 1990s for good reason, wanting to create alternative media sources because so much of the mainstream media sources had become had a liberal bias. But then what has happened over time is that right-wing media has created their own bubble where, there are certain things you can't say, there's certain information you're not going to get if you're in that media bubble. And so we've seen a lot of people who, if you're conservative, you tend to trust only those media sources and don't really trust anything outside of that bubble. And then I think the third thing that's happened is social media, and especially how the algorithms give us a distorted view of the world because they will elevate the most extreme content, the craziest content. And so it gives us this really distorted view of what most Americans actually believe, which is not the far right or the far left, which is the stuff that you mostly get if you're on social media. And then, of course, the algorithms also it's all confirmation bias. They'll give you more of what you like, right? And so you tend to get this very distorted view of the world.
Yes. Okay, I'm just going to leave that. I had things I was going to say, not needed. So if that's kind of the big picture landscape again, you then, Caleb, are trying to hold the folks together that the algorithms are sending different information to, and you're trying to minister to all of them. And so you've started to tell that story, but how do you minister to people that are fearful of immigrants, may even be spreading disinformation with being a church that's trying to care for immigrants?
So ethnocentrism is not a new problem. The Apostle Paul, much of his ministry was telling Christians in small house churches to knock it off. I would just invite you to read through Paul's letters through the lens of Jesus' prayer in John 17, that the church would be one. And one of the divisions, there are many, there's economic divisions in the church, the rich and the poor, there's social, but there's also ethnic divisions. And so, if I could say it this way, it's very natural for people in our congregations to be afraid of the outsider. This has always been a problem that the church has had. The American church, over the last 50 years, because of the homogeneous growth unit principle, that you can grow a big church by focusing on one target demographic, usually if it's in the Pheonix suburbs, it's a white, middle class, college educated, and you can get to 10,000 people that way. And so for 50 years, we've been telling leaders the way to grow your church is soft ethnocentrism. And so it's no wonder that our people are very confused when we start talking about the outsider being welcomed in, because we haven't modeled that for them. And so I just want to notice, one, it's historic. Two, we've been discipling them towards this. And so the way out of that will be probably another 50 years of elevating the stories of our brothers and sisters who are not yet in the room, because we've gotten to this space, and figuring out, and this requires a ton of discernment, but figuring out safe, healthy, grace-filled ways to bring people together around tables. And there's a lot more to say about that. But a lot of it is for a pastor, and I'll just invite pastors, one of the things that you can do is you can give voice to those who people are not listening to. you do have usually the capacity to tell a story, to invite someone to give testimony, to invite people to read scripture in a different language, to start normalizing the distance between you and me, not as a threat, but as an opportunity for us to grow, and then inviting your people to embrace the discomfort of the diverse local community. And I would just, it seems to me that putting misfits at tables was the core method of discipleship of our Lord. And he would always bring people who didn't belong together and then say, so the fruit of the Spirit is kind of pointless if I'm just with people who are just like me. But when the fruit of the Spirit is manifest inside of a communion of saints who don't belong together, boy, the manifold wisdom of God is on display. And helping our people catch that vision that empowers them to embrace the discomfort of the diverse local congregation. They'll say, yes, we want that, but what really the issue is I don't want to do the discomfort stuff unless I see a bigger point towards it. And so I think casting that strong vision also helps.
And that's essentially the poorly told story I was trying to tell here, that like my discipleship journey of being able to hold more than one emotion at a time is the only way I was going to put myself in uncomfortable situations. Because if the vision that's being told to me as somebody that can avoid discomfort, the unjust ways of the world make it that I can avoid discomfort if I want to. And as a relatively affluent, white, straight man, all the categories of privilege, I can avoid discomfort. And I needed a vision that was big enough to make it worth pursuing some discomfort. And I needed to grow in my formation in a way that pursuing discomfort did not mean I had to get rid of all joy in my life. And I think previously, without having those words, those were the two options I thought. And if the two options in front of me are discomfort or comfort, I'm going to choose comfort over and over. But if the option is to have both at the same time, then I have a chance. So anyway, that's my attempt to connect that poorly told story. Napp, I'm going to ask you the same question, Caleb, and these need to be kind of brief answers. What is one practical step that you would encourage churches to take to build meaningful relationships with immigrant communities in their area?
There's a lot of resources out here
Yes.
On the tables I would point to. I would leave you with just one thing, and that is speak the truth. I think the Springfield lie, which we'll talk about the next panel, I think is a preview of what's to come over the next year, maybe 4 years. And truth needs advocates. One of the reasons that lies spread so easily is that people who know the truth, it's easier just to stay quiet. It's hard to tell the truth in certain environments. You can lose friends, you can lose income, but it's so important. It's so important for us to always be advocates of what is true. When I say speak the truth, it's not like to the mirror. It's like actually out there, advocating for what is true.
Yeah, amen. Caleb, what would you say?
Yeah, I'm going to say it crassly because of time.
That's why I like you, Caleb.
Make sure there's immigrants on your staff and elder board, and work like hell to make sure that white people don't have home field advantage. I'm just talking to white pastors. Whatever the majority is in the congregation you serve, work in such a way that nobody has home field advantage. And what I mean by home field advantage is you may have on your staff page or your elder board page a diversity of people, but when it comes to picking the playlist at the potluck, when it comes to picking what kind of coffee, what kind of all the 10,000 ways that we can other people unintentionally, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to spread the power around in such a way that we're all in the position to defer to the needs of the other, engaging in equity, not charity.